Hello! Welcome to English for Shared. Here, you learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's go!
Biography of Vladimir Putin. A story of power, strategy, and controversy. Introduction. The man behind the power. You've probably heard a lot about him in the news. To some, he's a strong and determined leader. To others, he's a controversial and feared figure. But after all, who is Vladimir Putin? This is the story of a boy who grew up in a small house in Lennengrad, now known as St. Petersburg, and became one of the most powerful and influential leaders of the 21st century. With a cold, calculating, and determined personality, Putin followed a path that took him from the KGB, the famous Soviet intelligence agency, to the very top of the Russian government. In this biography, we'll explore the most important moments of Vladimir Putin's life. We'll understand his choices, his challenges, and how he shaped modern Russia. Chapter 1. Childhood in Leningrad. A life begins in difficult times. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born on October 7, 1952, in Leningrad, a city now known as St. Petersburg. At the time, the city still bore deep scars from World War II. During the conflict, Leningrad was under siege by the Nazis for nearly 900 days, causing hunger, destruction, and suffering. The population endured terrible hardships, and even years after the war ended, the city still faced difficult times. Putin's family was humble. His father, Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, had fought in the war and later worked in a factory. His mother, Maria Ivanovna Shelomova, was also a factory worker. They lived in very modest conditions, in a small communal apartment, where several families shared a kitchen and bathroom. Putin grew up in that cramped environment, with no luxury at all. As a child, he was considered restless and curious, but he also had a solitary side. He liked to observe everything around him. He was a regular kid, but from an early age, he showed an unusual amount of willpower. Around the age of 11, Putin discovered a deep passion: judo. He began training in martial arts with discipline and dedication. The sport helped him develop self-control, focus, and resilience, qualities that he would carry throughout his life. In interviews, he has often said that judo taught him never to back down from challenges. Despite the difficulties, Putin was a good student. He wasn't brilliant, but he was persistent. In high school, he began to take an interest in politics and espionage. As a teenager, he dreamed of joining the KGB, something he considered very honorable at the time. That dream of becoming a spy seemed far off for a poor boy from Leningrad. But even then, he already showed something that would define his entire life: absolute determination. Chapter 2: The Path of Espionage: From Dream to Reality. After finishing school, Putin studied law at the Lennengrad State University, one of the city's most prestigious institutions. There, he was mentored by influential professors, including Anatoly Sobchak, who would later play a key role in his political career. During university, Putin kept a low profile and was always discreet. He avoided drawing attention, but did everything with excellence. He didn't like to talk much about himself. It was as if he were already training for the secretive life ahead. After graduating in 1975, Putin finally achieved his great dream. He was accepted into the KGB, the powerful intelligence agency of the Soviet Union. It was a feared organization, both inside and outside the country. There, he went through intense training in counterintelligence, surveillance, interrogation, and infiltration techniques. Putin's early years with the KGB were spent in Leningrad, but in 1985, he was transferred to East Germany, where he worked undercover in the city of Dresden. He lived there with his wife and daughters, leading an apparently ordinary life. But behind the scenes, he was carrying out secret intelligence operations. That phase was decisive. Putin learned to be methodical, calculated, and silent. He never made impulsive decisions. He observed carefully before acting. He once declared that, as a spy, he learned that controlling emotions is crucial. You must always appear calm, even when inside you're at war, he said. During his time as an agent, he witnessed the collapse of the communist bloc in Europe. He saw firsthand the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Few understood as clearly as he did that the Soviet world was falling apart. When he returned to Russia in the early 1990s, the KGB was weakened, and the country was sinking into a deep economic and political crisis. It was in this moment of transition that Putin decided to leave the world of espionage. But his experience, strategic coldness, and skill in keeping secrets would go with him, now into the world of politics. Chapter 3: The Fall of the Soviet Union and the New Russia, a Nation in Ruins. In the early 1990s, the Soviet Union, which had been a global superpower for decades, began to collapse. The communist system, which had controlled every aspect of people's lives, fell apart. The Soviet republics began to break away, demanding independence. In 1991, the Soviet Union officially came to an end, giving rise to the Russian Federation. For the Russian people, it was a time of chaos. The economy was in ruins. Salaries were delayed. Store shelves were empty. Many lost their jobs and savings overnight. Inflation skyrocketed, crime surged, and the country sank into a deep sense of instability and fear. It was during this time, amid the collapse of the old regime, that Vladimir Putin took his first steps into politics. Leaving the KGB, he began working with his former university professor, Anatoly Sobchak, who had become the mayor of St. Petersburg. Putin worked behind the scenes in the city government. He was responsible for matters related to foreign investment and international relations. With his discreet and efficient manner, he gained Sobchak's trust. He rarely appeared in the media, but became known as someone who got things done quickly. After Sobchak lost re-election, Putin moved to Moscow, where his career took a dramatic leap. There, he began working for the federal government, taking on increasingly important roles, until he caught the attention of then-President Boris Yeltsin. Yeltsin was facing serious health problems and struggling to govern a country still trying to recover. When he saw Putin as a serious, loyal, discreet, and efficient man, Yeltsin appointed him director of the FSB, formerly the KGB, in 1998, and shortly after, Prime Minister of Russia in 1999. In December of that same year, Boris Yeltsin unexpectedly resigned from the presidency and named Putin as acting president. In his farewell speech, Yeltsin declared, "Today, I hand over the reins of power to a man who will ensure Russia's stability." And just like that, almost silently, Vladimir Putin reached the top of Russian power. Chapter 4: The President of the New Russia: Order, Strength, and Control. In March 2000, Putin won the presidential elections with more than 50% of the votes. Most Russians saw him as a firm, quiet, and determined figure, exactly the opposite of the chaotic government before him. His first goal was to restore order. Putin confronted the oligarchs, billionaire businessmen who had gained a lot of power during the 1990s. He brought them into line or pushed them aside, making it clear that real power was once again in the Kremlin. Putin also invested in restructuring the economy. The country began to grow, attracting investments and increasing oil and gas production, Russia's two main exports. Salaries began to rise again, and people started to feel a real improvement in their daily lives. As a result, Putin's popularity skyrocketed. Many Russians saw him as the man who restored national pride, someone who brought order back after a time of shame and humiliation. He became a symbol of strength, stability, and patriotism. But there was another side to this story. To maintain control, Putin began to restrict press freedom, weaken opposition parties, and concentrate more and more power in his own hands. Journalists were persecuted, activists were arrested, and critical voices were silenced. Even so, his internal popularity remained high. In 2004, Putin was re-elected with over 70% of the vote. By law, he couldn't remain in office for more than 2 consecutive terms. So in 2008, he appointed a close ally, Dmitry Medvedev, to be president. Meanwhile, Putin took the position of prime minister, keeping full control over the country's most important decisions. In 2012, he returned to the presidency, this time with a 6-year term after a constitutional change. From that point on, Putin began to shape Russia in his own image. A nationalist, militarized country closed to Western influence. While many saw him as an authoritarian leader, millions within Russia still considered him a defender of the homeland. He claimed his mission was to restore Russia's greatness, even if that meant facing the entire world. Chapter 5: Conflicts and Controversies. The Man Who Challenged the World. Starting in 2012, with his return to the presidency, Vladimir Putin began to act more aggressively on the international stage. He no longer focused only on maintaining internal order. Now, he wanted to restore Russia's global prestige. For that, he was ready to go head-to-head with the West, especially the United States and Europe. Crimea and Ukraine. In 2014, Putin made one of the most controversial decisions of his career. He annexed Crimea, a region that had belonged to Ukraine. The official justification was to protect the Russian population living there and to secure Russia's strategic interests. Crimea is home to an important naval base for the Russian military in the Black Sea. The international community reacted strongly. Russia was condemned by Western countries and expelled from the G8, a group made up of the world's largest economies. Additionally, the annexation of Crimea triggered a war in eastern Ukraine, which claimed thousands of lives and opened deep wounds between the two neighboring nations. But Putin didn't back down. On the contrary, his stance reinforced his image as a relentless and nationalist leader. Within Russia, his popularity grew even more. Many Russians saw him as the man who reclaimed a piece of the homeland lost after the fall of the Soviet Union. The War of 2022. In February 2022, Putin took another risky step. He invaded Ukraine, launching a full-scale war. He claimed his goal was to demilitarize and denazify the Ukrainian government. But to the world, it was seen as an unjustified attack on a sovereign country. The war brought, and still brings, devastating consequences. Thousands dead, millions of refugees, and heavy economic sanctions imposed on Russia. Foreign companies left the country, the economy suffered, and international isolation grew. Still, Putin stuck to his narrative. He said Russia was defending itself, and that the West was trying to weaken the country. The war divided opinions, but solidified Putin's image as a man willing to do anything to protect what he sees as Russia's interests, even at great cost. Chapter 6: The Man and the Myth: The Cult of Personality. Over the years, Vladimir Putin has built an almost cinematic image of himself. Photos and videos of him riding horses shirtless, practicing judo, piloting fighter jets, hunting in Siberia, or swimming in frozen lakes were widely broadcast by state media. This strategy was part of a well-crafted plan to turn Putin into a symbol of strength, masculinity, and leadership. He portrayed himself as someone above ordinary politicians, a true defender of the nation. Private life a mystery. At the same time, Putin has always been extremely secretive about his personal life. He was married to Lyudmila Putina for nearly 30 years, but the couple quietly divorced in 2013. They have 2 daughters, Maria and Katerina, but they live far from the spotlight under false names, and almost nothing official is known about them. This family isolation is seen by many as a form of protection. Putin fears attacks, kidnappings, and even espionage. There are rumors that he lives with bodyguards in secret locations and rarely travels without a strong security setup. Allies and enemies. Putin formed a tight inner circle of loyal allies, many of them former KGB agents like himself. At the same time, he became the target of criticism, accusations, and even conspiracies. Several journalists, opposition leaders, and ex-spies who criticized his government were found dead under mysterious circumstances, such as Anna Politkovskaya, Boris Nemtsov, and Alexander Litvinenko. Russia denies involvement, but the world watches these deaths with suspicion. Despite all this, Putin's image remains strong among a large part of the Russian population, especially older and more nationalist citizens. To them, he is the man who gave the country its dignity back. To others, he represents authoritarianism, fear, and censorship. Chapter 7: Legacy and Future. A chapter still unwritten. Vladimir Putin's legacy is still being written, but it's already certain that he is one of the most influential figures in modern Russian history. Since taking power in 2000, he has completely transformed how Russia is seen and how it acts in the world. In 2020, Putin passed a constitutional reform that allows him to remain in power until 2036, if he chooses. That would mean more than 36 years in command, even longer than Joseph Stalin. A leader for the history books or to be forgotten. His supporters say he gave Russia pride, sovereignty, and stability. They say that without Putin, Russia would have drowned in chaos and foreign influence. His critics, however, claim he created an authoritarian regime where freedom is limited, the opposition is silenced, and people live under fear and propaganda. The world remains divided on him. Meanwhile, Russia is going through a delicate moment, facing sanctions, war, and uncertainty. The country's future and Putin's place in history are still undecided. Vladimir Putin is a complex figure. He grew up in a country in ruins, became a spy, and rose to be a powerful leader. For some, he is a patriot, defending Russia's interests. For others, he is a modern-day dictator. Loved by some, feared by others, Putin continues to shape the fate of millions. His story is still unfolding, but it is already one of the most impressive and controversial of the 21st century. Will he be remembered as a strong nationalistic leader or as a cold, ruthless dictator? Maybe time will answer that question.